Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this month, April, the Powering Up Reading, How to Engage the Big Players Across Your Community, your school community webinar. I'm just going to give it another minute just to make sure that I've got everyone there. I know that schools are very busy places and people may be rushing to get to this webinar and maybe a little late. So we'll just give it another minute and we'll get going shortly. Okay, let's get started. So look, if I've just got a couple of new people that have just arrived, just welcome on this Thursday afternoon, 19th of April, to the Powering Up Reading, How to Engage the Big Players Across Your School Community. I just want to be really clear in starting off that this is certainly not intended to be a lesson in phonics or anything like that this afternoon. What I really want to sort of dig a bit deeper into is how we can power up reading by engaging our community and not discounting the incredible importance that our teachers have and their role in teaching reading in schools, but certainly their ability to be right at the heart of this and knowing their students incredibly well, understanding the data that they're collecting on their students, and which certainly allows them to plan accordingly and make sure that they're, I suppose, hitting that target spot for students at their point of need. And I suppose the other part that I think that's really important in this area is understanding their impact and sharing what they know with both students and parents. And the reason why I think that's so important is that certainly Adam and I and the work that we do at Real Schools is very much about empowering teachers and teachers as experts in their schools. And this is, I suppose, essentially what this webinar is about, is about empowering teachers to be out there and active and confident in the messages that they're sending home and broadly to the community about how they can support the reading program. And certainly in my experience with a really strongly engaged school community, the acceleration which we can see with our kids and their reading improvement can be absolutely staggering. So I'm certainly going to talk a little bit to that this afternoon as well. I think one of the other things that's really important is that in this process of powering up reading, that students have a really clear understanding of where they're at and what they need to do next. And in that process, that parents know also where their kids are at, and I suppose really pushing your school community to commit to the reading with their kids most nights. And I suppose the part that can be really powerful for schools is making sure that parents know what they can do to make the reading experience enjoyable, because I think that's one of the most important things that can be done at home, but also powerful because they've got a couple of skills or they've got a bit of an idea of what they need to do based on the stage that their child is at in their reading. The other part that's really important is encouraging your community, the broader family and community, to promote reading and support the school program and assist in any way that they can. There's some fantastic people in your community that if you, it's just a matter of asking, and you'd be really surprised about who would be prepared to come in and assist what's going on at the school. I think the other really important piece of the puzzle here is about leadership, and that leadership communicates the importance of reading and provides professional development for teachers where needed. And I think that's essential, because that builds the capacity of teachers to be experts, teachers of reading, and then the school and the leadership promote teachers as experts. And the ability to promote yourself as an expert can be done through newsletters, class letters, via social media platforms that the school could be using. And a lot of schools now are getting really smart about the type of parent or engagement that they have at the school. Rather than getting parents to participate in meetings or attend meetings, they're really engaging them around parent reading workshops so that they are skilled in that area as well. So I'm just going to click to the next slide, and I just want to be really clear to you today that this, while you're going to see lots of glossies come up on the screen in regard to, I suppose, just pictures relating to what we're going to be talking about, is that this webinar, you have some control and you'll have a dashboard there. If you have any questions along the way, please feel free to ask, and I'll keep an eye out for any questions and answer them in real time as we look at this powering up reading in your school and getting your community involved. So I just, I always like to get a bit of a sense of who the participants are in this webinar today. So I've got a couple of questions for you. If you've been involved in these webinars before, you'll be pretty well versed in the first one. So I'm just going to open up this poll when it lets me. Let's go poll. All right, so I'm going to, all right, I'm just going to launch this poll. If you could just answer this, I'll leave you, I'll give you a minute or so to answer this. So what role are you currently in? Teacher, support staff, principal, or system leader? Another couple of minutes, or no, I shouldn't say a couple of minutes. I'll close poll and I'll share those results. So we've got certainly a good group of teachers and principals and some support staff here, and some others as well. So I'll make sure that what I'm talking about today, I suppose I'm addressing those key areas of schools and so on. Now, I don't know what's happened here. You may have a picture of my children sitting up here at the moment. I'm just going to see if I can find there we go. Righto, so again, so your starting point. So I've got a bit of a clear idea of who we're working with today. Sorry if that's ended up on my screen. I do apologise for that. I just got one more question that I'm kind of interested in. And what I suppose what I'm interested in here is the biggest challenge that you're facing in your school at the moment. So I'm going to launch this poll. You may get my home screen again. I do apologise if that's the case, but I'm a bit interested in this. I just want to make sure that this webinar covers off on the areas that are challenging at the moment. So I'm going to launch this poll. The question is, what is your biggest challenge in engaging parents, community in the school reading program? And so we've got having parents understand the importance of reading, getting them to read to their children at home, confidently sharing student data so parents know how to support their readers, providing parents with training to be skilled reading mentors, or engaging parents as reading assistants in your school. So I'll let you answer that, and I'll give you another 20 seconds. I certainly have intended or planned this webinar to make sure that I cover off on these areas anyway. All right, I'm going to close that poll now. I'm going to share those results with you. So absolutely, I think this is a real common one, is that having parents understand the importance of reading. And then that, obviously, that sharing of data is one that's really critical. And then again, providing parents with training to be skilled reading mentors is also a challenge out there. So I'll absolutely address those areas. So I'll hide those results and I'll open up the screen again and we'll get moving. So it's a bit of a method to my madness around this picture here. Dogs are the best people. Well, I'm not sure whether there was a bit of research that came out last year, which gave me a good giggle in the car. And I was actually with my two kids, Charlie and Evie, and they thought it was quite hilarious because at a school that I worked at in the Northern Territory, we didn't use dogs, but we had in some of our in our lower primary classrooms, a chair and a teddy bear. And for many of the kids that weren't able to read at home, they were spending some time sitting in the chair reading to the teddy bear. And in some ways it acted in a similar way. So I think that the part of the fact that dogs are non-judgmental, and if the dog is able to sit there and the student feels confident and feels as though they're not being this isn't a critical process where they're going to be getting feedback all the time. It's certainly, while the dog's certainly no literacy expert, just by providing a really comfortable place for kids to read, it had an impact. So if dogs are able to do that, then I reckon as a group of teachers and leaders that we can do some really extraordinary things with our kids. So look, issues around children learning to read are rarely out of the news, and it's not really surprising because of how fundamental reading is to a child's life chances. We know that the more you read, the better you become. So really the aim of this webinar, the better reader you become, the aim of this webinar is to increase the opportunities and frequency in which students read, but to add to that, the specific activities that will help students at each stage. So what are the things that we can do as expert or teachers of literacy that allow students to excel at the stages of learning or reading that they're at? Now, we know that children who read often and across a wide range of topics have greater academic success. And this is really supported by, tons of research. So a recent piece of research was around dogs, and the results were positive because the students, part of this is, as I said, they were reading more often. And I suppose the idea that if kids are building up reading mileage, then there's nothing really shocking about that research. But what I love about this is that essentially the fact that dogs are a loyal, loving listener and they don't provide critical feedback. And sometimes we really need to work hard with our parents to understand that home reading is meant to be an enjoyable experience because we repeat the behaviours that I suppose that we repeat things that we enjoy and are positive experiences. We're certainly not going to, kids are certainly not going to want to go home and read if every time they read they get in trouble for getting words wrong or not reading accurately. That, I think, is a real mistake when all we really want is for reading to be a really enjoyable experience for kids. Now, I'm not suggesting that home reading be without feedback or correction, but I think the dog research reminds us how important it is to ensure that the reading experience is positive. So if you were to exit the webinar right now, that would be my one suggestion, that whatever you do with your parents, that you really encourage them to make sure that reading experience is a positive experience, because kids will not walk into home reading if every time they do it, it's just a horrible experience. And I think that's, that if we can get that message through in our school community around reading often and for enjoyment, then I think we're kind of halfway there. And while it seems a really simplistic message, it's a pretty effective one. So interestingly, I've certainly in the work that I've been doing. Look, over the last 6 or 7 years, I've had the real pleasure of working with a couple of incredibly talented people in the field of literacy, one being Dr. Kath Glasswell. And one of the things that we have spoken about over the last few years is this idea that our beginning readers get a certain level of attention and then it drops away, because once students are able to read accurately or read words, that's enough for many parents to say, well, they've figured it out and I don't need to be involved anymore. And that, I reckon, is a really critical mistake. It's so important that frequency in which readers get to read to another person or that shared reading experience, I think all readers need well into right up through primary school and into high school. My young fella at the moment, we still sit and read and talk through, digging sort of deeply into the underlying meaning of the books, even though he is a really capable, independent and advanced reader now. The types of discussions that are coming out of this experience that both he and I have are incredibly rich. So, look, I'm sure all of us can remember the enjoyment we experience from sharing reading, whether at school or at home or with our parents. I certainly remember the reading that I did with my parents. Probably my mum coming in and being a reading support, offering reading support at our school. That's probably the one part that I remember the most, other than reading most nights at home. Now, there's a growing body of research reporting that almost 1/3 of children aged 6 to 11 don't experience home or shared reading, however we want to look at it, with many of these students reporting that they miss that experience. And I think that's something that I would really suggest, if you were looking at ways to leverage the importance of this message, it's that type of research that you could use in your newsletter. Newsletters are such a good platform, particularly electronic newsletters now, for you to be able to engage your parents in, I suppose, sharing your knowledge as teachers and leaders, as experts in the teaching field. You've been to university. That's exactly what you are. You are experts in your game, and you need to, I think, stand really strongly and confidently in that message. And I would be sharing that message that we know from the research that kids miss the experience of reading at home. One reason for home reading stopping is parents feel that once, as I said before, that once their child can read the words, it's no longer necessary to read to them anymore. And accurate readers, particularly as they transition to becoming more independent readers, need the support to develop greater understanding of the more complex language and themes, which I think fosters a whole lot of other skills around listening skills, spelling, comprehension, as I said, that wider vocabulary. And I think it also reinforces many of those really essential foundational literacy skills being taught at school. Now, while all of this is incredibly important, what I think stands out is the opportunity that shared reading provides through the positive and deep conversation about and around books. I think that's the big story here. I think is that we all are living such busy lives now, and we know that our parents back many years ago, would generally be the father would be working or the mother would be working, but there would be someone at home that could take up those tasks of supporting reading at home. And now, with so many families having both people working, the challenge of fitting reading in to all the other things that have to happen before bedtime, it's huge. So I suppose that encouraging parents, or certainly sending that message to them about how important those positive and deep conversations about and around books are, that even if it's not every night, that we're encouraging parents to get involved in this type of activity as often as they possibly can with their children. Now, I think when parents share the reading, it allows students to use their imagination. So when parents, you know, if you're reading page for page or a couple of pages at a time, you're giving your child they're giving their children the opportunity to use their imagination and to build a clearer understanding of what is going on in the book. And certainly if you've used shared reading as a strategy in your classroom, you know how, I suppose, that frees up that space and that brain space for kids to start to think a little bit broader than the book and maybe make those links with what they may have experienced themselves. And while we generally do this well with younger children, we sometimes forget it's important as children get older, and we want them to be lifelong readers. So we've got to continue to make sure that this reading process is a really positive one for our students. So one of the things that I think is incredibly important, and I've certainly been working in this area over the last few years, is around, and as a principal, but now in my work with real schools, is knowing your data. And look, schools are collecting a large amount of data these days, and the level of understanding around the collected data varies greatly across schools. And I see that in the schools that I'm working with at the moment. Some schools are running such a fine-tooth comb over their data that probably potentially bordering on just complete burnout for their staff, but others are finding this really nice balance where they're collecting the right amount of data and it's really informing their practice. And I think this is where schools are able to power up the work with their parents and what they want their parents to do at home, because if the teachers have got a really good level of understanding about what the test can provide them, rather than just a number or a level, when they actually look at the process of the test, be it PM or Fontus or a Torch, what are those having a really good understanding of what are those tests for and what are they actually telling me, and how can I share that information with my students and my parents so that I get really good bang for bucks out of that data. And I think in communicating to parents and students through this, you have a much better ability to accurately communicate to parents and students around what books they should be reading and the type of support that they would need at home. Now, while I'm not going to talk you through each test that may be out there, and some are better than others, I think that's probably it's a well-established idea. It's vital that the tests you are using are well understood by teachers and by leadership, and that the conversation around data and progress of students is something that is established in the school, and there's a platform for that to occur at regular stages during the year. Now, we know students at each stage of the reading development need specific support, and I think it's important, and it's certainly not I suppose a goal of this webinar to cover it, but I think it's really important that teachers right across the school, because we know the variance of ability across our classrooms, that we have a really good understanding of what emergent readers need, what early readers need, what transitional readers need, what those self-extending readers need, and what advanced readers need. And I certainly have seen, particularly in my experience, this very hard and ingrained idea that I'm just going to teach to the middle, and so many kids miss out in that process because they can't engage either with the text or the discussion, or even actually just the basics of even decoding what's in front of them. And I think we need to be really careful about, or very on the front foot around making sure that as teachers we've got as experts, that we have a really deep knowledge of what readers need across the board. Now, this knowledge allows you to confidently work with parents and anyone helping with reading at school, and make sure that they're hitting the spot, or they're they're doing the best possible work they can. So that would be, I think that's so critical. We're all collecting data, and most schools, well, almost all schools that I'm working with are collecting good pieces of data, but in the challenge is around understanding what the test is for, but also having a really clear understanding of how that test should be administered, and then what type of discussion needs to happen next. What can I share? What's going to be helpful for our parents and particularly our students? Because if you get your parents on board and the kids know what they need to do next, there's absolute huge ability to see big improvements in your classroom. So I just wanted to just quickly talk about this level of feedback and how do we provide feedback to our readers. What do they know about their reading skills that can help them improve? Because this doesn't need to be. I think in some schools it seems as though sharing this information with kids, they're worried that it's complicated or they may not understand it. But if it's posed or put in front of them in the right way, they can use it and run with it. And the other thing that we've seen work incredibly well, and I said in a lot of schools, around data walls being really visible to students. Now, there's a fair bit of debate around this, but it can be a huge motivator for students to see where they are against other students. If you're worried about how parents might react, communicate with them. Remember, we talked about this, teachers as experts, that we tell them why we're using data walls and why we think that will be a powerful tool to get kids reading. It shouldn't certainly be a competition. Generally, in most schools, if it's ever a problem, it's the parents that cause the problem and not the kids, because when a data wall is put up and it's explained well by the teacher, the kids support each other and back each other in to improve. I suppose the other one is around, if you give kids that platform where you're able to tell them what the data, where they are at the moment, things like student-led conferences where students are able to tell their parents where they are at, can be incredibly powerful conversations, more so than hearing it from the teachers, because for a student or a child to be able to say, this is where I'm at and this is what I've got to do next, shows, particularly to the parents, that the teacher is doing some pretty incredible work in the classroom around building confident readers who know what they need to do next. And the other one, while there's a list, there's a huge list of what else you can do, but those reading, if you've got reluctant readers, you may find that there might be a level of competition around those reluctant readers. Reading mileage charts send a really clear message to kids that if I'm not reading so well and the other student beside me is improving quickly, and they can see that student that's improving quickly is reading more often, it sends a message that's broader than reading, that if I do the work, I'll improve. And so certainly definitely my experience has been that while it might not get all your class, there are a group of kids who may be reluctant readers that will pick that up and run with it, and they'll be looking to read more because they know that that's the way they improve as readers. That yes, there's more dedicated work that needs to happen in the class. One of the big pieces of the puzzle is just that they build up that reading mileage, and a reading mileage chart can be really beneficial for that as well. Now, the other one, and the reason why I share this with you, is that we cater for readers much better when we know what they like and what they're interested in. And the work that I had done with Dr. Kath Glasswell, one of the first things, or one of the first activities that she ran in the school was around a reading inventory and finding out what kids were interested in and whether or not our library matched up with that. And I just wanted to share a story. Well, I suppose in some ways, I certainly felt a little bit of regret about it. A student that I taught many moons ago in Queensland, there's no doubt that the young fella was quite an intelligent kid, but what he wouldn't engage in class. It ended up being massive issue, behaviour, and it went on and on and on until the school decided, certainly not something that I favour as a decision, but they decided to expel him and he went to another school. And I didn't see him again for about 4 or 5. I didn't see him for about 4 or 5 years, and I was up in Queensland at a conference, and I jumped on the train at South Bank, and a young fella walked up to me and he said, "G'day, Mr. Martin." I said, "Oh, yeah," and I knew, "G'day, Troy," and he had a big art folio under his arm. He had tats all over him, and I said, "So what are you up to? You're doing art?" And he said, No. I'm doing forensic science." And I can't believe that I just assumed that he would be doing art or something like that. And I sort of, not that there's anything wrong with art, of course, but I'd sort of lowered my expectations of him based on my experience 5 years prior. And I said to him, "Hey, tell us about your time at," and he went to Pacific Pines High School after he left Helensvale, where I was working. And he said, "The first couple of weeks when I went to Pacific Pines, I had a science class, and the science teacher said to me, take this book and have a read. I reckon you might be interested in it." And he said that the rest was history. He said, "I read this biology textbook and it made sense to me. And the next one I read was chemistry and then physics. And it was a list." And for him, what had occurred for him and what I'd missed the target with, and I promised myself, I'm sure I have, but I promised myself I wouldn't do it again, was this teacher in a couple of weeks at Pacific Pines had seen that Troy had a real interest in science in the same way that this reading inventory works, and was able to leverage that, which ended up seeing this young fella end up with an OP3, which was way out of the ballpark of what we thought he might achieve. But that deeper knowledge that this teacher at Pacific Pines had managed to grasp with Troy had a profound impact on him and what he's ended up doing. So it was a real clear reminder to me around this idea, is that we need to understand our kids, their interests, how they best learn, and a reading inventory is a really key process in that task. Now, reluctant readers don't often have access to the right books, and so I would say really openly, and this is probably, I would imagine that librarians all over the country, well, some may throw rocks at me the next time I drive past their school, but I absolutely urge schools to make sure that their library is opening up its doors and emptying its shelves, because to me, dusty books are absolutely useless. And if your library is full of books that your kids aren't interested in, you are making your job so much harder than it needs to be. So the reading inventory gives you an ability to tap into what kids are really interested in, because kids will read books that they're interested in. They won't read books that are dusty, old, outdated, and boring. So that would be another really key idea to powering up reading at your school. Get that library open, empty the shelves, get the books out of there, because the library needs to be an open social space where kids can look at books, put them back on the shelf, go again, take them to their classroom. And I think, you know, any school budget should have a contingency that's around loss of books. If you're protecting books like they are diamonds, you're wasting your time. I think you're going to end up with lots of kids that are not going to get access to the books the way they should. So when I talk about this sharing is caring, the research is clearly suggesting that we should not stop reading with our children just because they have learned to read independently. Home reading or shared reading should continue until they no longer wish to share reading with you. And if children don't want to read to their parents at an early age, it usually says more about the experience than anything else. So it's very much about that message being really clear across your community about encouraging the fun and how important it is around this connection that it creates with kids and their parents, because we know particularly the challenges that we're facing across schools right across Australia is this disconnect kids are feeling, and the ability to sit down and read and connect through conversation and what's going on around them certainly allows parents to stay connected for as long as possible with their children. And you know, I would also encourage parents to bring the book to life through their stories. I think I'm probably in the 100th version of every story my dad ever told me, but I don't get tired of them because they're the stories that he used to share with me when we were reading books all those years ago, and it was his, I suppose, expression and the questions that he asked, and you know, I'm sure he exaggerated many of the stories that he told us, but to me, it was those stories that he related to the book that I might have been reading that really illuminated and helped me gain a deeper understanding of what the book was about. So while we certainly have those lower readers that need those very repetitive style books, I certainly wouldn't shy away with also adding books with more complex language, because those very basic books, the hat was green, the hat was red, they're not really developing the love for reading. Whereas if you also add to that reading process a book that is which has more complex language and more exciting themes and more interesting themes, it's certainly motivating students to get better at reading so that they can independently read those types of books as well. I think, you know, we want them to share. We want reading to be shared for as long as possible. It's worth finding time as often as possible, ideally every night, to share the experience of reading. Now, if you are really struggling to get your parents in your community to read, I'd be thinking about getting that broader community involved. When I was in the Northern Territory, we had that real challenge of getting parents to read. Part of that was that probably some of our parents couldn't read, and so we had to be quite realistic about that. That while we might have been running reading workshops for parents, many of our parents wouldn't have come for, I suppose, that fear of that I'm actually not a good reader, and it's very hard for me to support my child. So we thought really deeply about who are the other people in our community that could support it. And obviously, you know, we had really novel things happening in our school around the chair and the TED, the teddy in the room that they would read to. We also enlisted the help of grade sixes to support our lower kids. So they were in the library in the morning working as reading mentors, and we trained them up so they weren't just sitting there listening, but they helped the kids with things like prediction and using the book or using the pictures as clues and cues for words that they weren't sure of, and that worked really well. But the other thing, while not everyone's going to have access to the group of people that we use next, we enlisted the big guns, and literally the big guns, because across the road from us we had a group, the North Force group, which were a group of Army cadets who were working across at Bachelor Institute, and they came across a couple of mornings a week and read with our kids. Now, when you have, I suppose, interesting young men and women coming into your school dressed in army greens, the kids were queued up to the library to try and get an opportunity to read to these Norforce soldiers. So we can be really clever about how we access our community, ensuring that our kids get as many opportunities to read outside or inside the classroom throughout the 5 days that we have them. Now, I spoke before about the importance of educating our parents. What does parent reading education program look like at your school? So I'd like you to have a bit of a think about that. What are you doing with your parents that supports them to be better reading mentors? And could you improve that? And if you're with colleagues and you're sitting and having and you're able to have that discussion, while there's probably not a lot of time to do it right now, I think it's something you should really have a bit of a think about. What could we do better? And how can we make sure our parents are doing some really important work for us? Could you run sessions that are related to the phases of reading development? We know that there's different things or different skills required for each stage that readers might be in, and certainly our parents are really capable of supporting in that area. And could you model what a reading experience looks like? Because certainly I did some work at a school last year where I worked with parents, and what surprised me the most was the parents at the end said, or a number of them said, I didn't realise that this could be a fun experience. And so while it seems that makes sense to us, if we haven't had that conversation or we haven't modelled that experience to our parents, I'm not sure we can be certain that some parents don't feel a similar way. So that ability to find the right type of book and then model that to parents could be a really powerful workshop to run at your school. I suppose the other one is, how might you persuade the parents to come to the workshop? After hours, that can be really difficult. If you do it first thing in the morning, a lot of people can't access it. And if you've got a decent sort of platform, social media platform, you can film this stuff so that anyone that can't make it has access to watch it back afterwards. And I suppose you're trying to get as many of your target audience as possible. If you've got parents that are not great supporters of the reading program, how could you get the students to help build that support? Because generally, if students have a good understanding of what they need to do next and they're excited by reading, their excitement can have quite an interesting impact on their parents at home. So you can certainly use the students in your room to do some of that work for you as well. I'd really urge you to get creative, think outside the box. If it's not working now, then change it up. Don't stick with something that's not having a big impact. Get creative, for sure. So one of the ones, you may have seen this before, but I thought I'd share this with you. And this was one of the reasons why the parents at the workshop I ran last year talked about this idea of they liked this because it was all about making sure that students felt confident and they could continue reading rather than being stopped and stuck and told off for not understanding words and having to sound them out. And all of a sudden, the piece of the book that they're reading begins to make no sense because it's so stop-start that the meaning's completely lost in translation. And this is a strategy that I know that's used quite broadly, but one that Dr. Kath Glasswell shared with a number of parents at a school that I was working at. And basically, really, as simple as it looks, it's around pausing, waiting a few seconds for your child to work out the word for themselves, but not that long that meaning is lost or frustration ruins the experience. When we're prompting, we're encouraging your child to look at the pictures and use them as a cue or a clue, and asking them questions like, what do you reckon, what word would make sense here? What would sound right? What letter does it start with? Can you tell me what that sound is? If the word makes sense, then replace it, and they replace it with something close, let them keep reading and go back to it later on. And the other one is around praise. We want to make sure that it's a positive experience, so we support and encourage through praise, which will make it a positive experience. And positive experiences encourage repeat behaviour and essentially build confidence in kids. And we can use that. We can encourage our parents to use feedback that talks about the types of behaviours that we want to see repeated. Like, I like the way you did whatever it might be. Well done for that. Was really great work because I noticed you've been practicing, and we're giving specific feedback to our students or our children. The other one is around the Goldilocks Rule. You may have seen this from time to time, but how are books being selected for your students, and what do the resources in your school look like? I think that was something like when we're talking about the library. If we're looking at a reading inventory, have we got lots of books available for our early readers, our emergent readers, and all the way up to our, those interesting books for those students that are advanced readers? Are your books accurately leveled? It's a huge problem in schools that when teachers go in to find leveled books for their students based on the fact that they've collected some data on them, there's not enough leveled books for readers at certain stages or certain phases of that reading development continuum. So often if they are not, it's such a daunting task that if we don't, those books, everyone avoids the job. I'm not going in there to sort out those leveled books. And funnily enough, it's avoided for months, years, and in my experience in some schools for decades. And so what you end up having is a reading room or a whatever it might be that is really not doing its job properly. So I would suggest if you are a teacher and your reading room is a bit of a mess at the moment, I'd be asking your leadership to give you some time with a group of teachers, maybe after school. I know a really talented teacher that I worked with recently, she put on a cheese and wine afternoon, and all the teachers in that part of the school went in there, ate some cheese, drank a couple of glasses of wine, and they did this over a couple of months, not every night, of course, and they got that room back into line really, really quickly. So we want our readers reading at that zone of proximal development, which is essentially the Goldilocks Rule. Not too hard, not too easy, but just right. And that's really important. So the other one is around, every night's not going to look like this picture, but find the right books that create great moments. Parents are busy, and so we need to make sure that they enjoy the moment as well. Early readers should be exposed to more complex texts. We all know how repetitive and boring they are, as I said before. Teach parents how to use these books as well, but encourage them to balance this with, really awesome books. But I suppose the part that I think is really important, that if we be really creative about the space in the house that might be the reading space, or those opportunities to go to the bookshop or the library to find books, we're modelling behaviours that we want to encourage in our children. And that's certainly something that you can share with your parents around making it fun, changing the type of language, expression, characters. The whole box and dice can make the experience pretty good fun. Now, I always feel that it takes a village, probably not this village, but the idea that the community can have a really big impact in the reading space at your school. If you're struggling to get parents on board, and I know that was something that came up on that poll question, is getting parents to understand the importance of it. Now, if you've tried and you've been quite exhaustive about it and you're still struggling, there are other options. Now, of course, you have to be careful about inviting other people into your school, but there are retirement villages, for example, that are filled with great people who could be incredible reading mentors. And I could only imagine the stories that they would share with the students. Your community, your school community would have many wonderful people that would love to help at school. Sometimes it's just a matter of putting it out there and seeing what comes back. And often these options are avoided because of the potential risk, but I reckon those potential risks are much lower than you would think. And the Working with Children card is free for volunteers. So if you want volunteers in your school, you direct them to the right place to get that Working with Children card. And if they're well supervised and there's some workshopping done behind it, they could be incredibly helpful at your school. But when we talk about that broader village, we're talking about those opportunities for our grandparent days, when grandparents can come in and share their books or things that they love to read, but creating as many opportunities for kids to read. You'd be really surprised by who's in your community. It could be writers, retired teachers, musicians, athletes, tradesmen, you name it. They're probably in your community and they have some time to help you out. So don't be shy, see what comes up. Look, the long game around this is all about engaging your community in this space. It may take some time, but in my experience, it is so worth it. It's certainly in the schools that I'm working with now, who are doing it well, and the schools that I've actually worked in, it adds real colour and life to the schools that I've worked in. And if you have more questions about this, please contact us, and we'll see certainly what's possible in working along schools in this space and sharing the enormous success that many of them are having. Now, I just want to point out a couple of things before we finish. There are obviously Real Schools is about partnering up with schools. We certainly aren't in the business of drop and run professional development. We believe that in order to get real change, that it takes time. So our partnerships are about working alongside your school over 12, 24 and 36 months. There's certainly some work that I've been doing around evidence-empowered data work that we're doing with schools, helping them get a better understanding of what the data is telling them about their kids and what the next steps are for them. So if you're interested or in I suppose, building a culture where data is informing practice, we'd love to talk to you. I'm sure we could do some great work alongside you. And remember that I suppose the whole adage around what we're doing at Real Schools is about building or I suppose creating caring students, really committed teachers who are skilled experts in their trade. And I think it's so important that schools promote their teachers in this way, and there's always a platform for them to share their expertise via newsletters, class letters, and so on. And I think the other part is that when we talk about engaging the community to support the types of things we're doing in the school, particularly around reading, that it's really important that we connect our community with our school as well. They can play such an incredible part. So the next steps, I don't know why this goes 3, 2, 1, but it does. There are a number of white papers that Adam and I have written. The most recent one is around evidence-empowered schools, which looks at data. And essentially for me, the reason why I ended up getting, I suppose, involved in these literacy projects and data projects is because at the end of the day, when we looked at the data, the number one thing that stood out for us is that the reason why kids weren't coming to school or weren't engaged is that they couldn't read, or certainly not read well enough for their year level or age appropriate ability. So certainly the starting point for the work that I'm doing is around getting a really good handle on the data in your school and then making really informed decisions about what those next steps are. At least download the slide deck, so you can do that if you've been. There'll be a link to that Chris, our admin manager, will provide for you. And the other one is write chat in the question box, and we will get in touch with you in the next 24 hours if you want to talk further about anything that we've covered today. Now, the next webinar is occurring on the 17th of May, later in May, and it's certainly around this storytelling for school leaders and making sure that the messages that you're providing in your school really pop. And I think sometimes in schools we build plans and our message doesn't get as far and wide as we would like, and we've got the ability to use story and that narrative that occurs so often in our school, and making sure that we use newsletters, assemblies, any of the platforms that we're using to make sure that the messages that we know are so important get through. And it's not necessarily adding more to a bulging list of things that we're already doing, but writing our communication in a way that engages and it's captivating and catchy enough to get, I suppose, get your message across in the school. I really believe that your stories that you're able to share that link to the broader message that you're trying to convey to your school community is far more powerful than any other form of communication that we offer to our school community. So that's a really great webinar that's occurring next month, and Adam is running that. It's free, so I'd really encourage you to jump on board. And finally, if you've got any questions for us, there are our contact details: www.realschools.com.au, info@realschools.com.au, and you can contact us on our free phone number of 1300 789 422. Thanks so much for joining us today. I hope you have a fantastic Friday and a really restful weekend, and yeah, look forward to hearing from you. Thanks.